Hello, I'm David Benitez, and this is Extreme Vocal Institute. And this week we're going to be talking about 6 common songwriting mistakes that metal vocalists make. This is a topic that we've had a lot of requests to cover here on our channel, so I wanted to make sure I started to talk about this a little bit more in our videos. In the beginning, especially after that brief period of time when we're learning how to actually make any of these screaming sounds in the first place, after that point, that's when we start to dabble with our own ideas a little bit. Because that's kind of why we get started in the first place a little bit. We have those vocalists we look up to. We have all of those different bits of inspiration around us that made us want to do this. And then we want to take it upon ourselves to be creative and get out there and do it ourselves. Now, very often we tend to make things very difficult for ourselves right out the gate. And what I'm going to talk about in this video aren't necessarily the single most important things to think about or rules by any means, but more so kind of helpful hints and guidelines in terms of how to navigate yourself a little bit when you're first starting out songwriting. First and foremost, one thing that happens a lot is lots of overlapping lines in those first couple of songs that we write. Now, that evokes a bit of that call and response. You say something and then you're implying the crowd or the listener should say something, and it creates this kind of catchy back and forth movement that can be a lot of fun, and you don't need to totally avoid, but you want to be careful about using it too much or like a very large chunk of the music in like the 2000s and the earlier 2010s. It's lots of those punched in lines back to back to back to back to back on top of each other. And that kind of becomes the theme of what you do. And it becomes very difficult to replicate any of that in any other setting apart from recording a line, walking away for a moment, and then recording the next one. It can make practicing more difficult, like at home or with your band, and then also trying to perform it as well. You just want to be careful not to overuse this. Just like any kind of writing style, like the rhyme schemes you're using and how many syllables, or what kinds of voices you're using, you don't want to abuse any of it too much, because you want to keep, just like the vocals themselves, you want to try and maintain balance, especially with the first couple of songs you write, because you're still kind of getting your feet wet. That being said, that kind of leads into the next thing, which is not writing with live in mind. All of our goals are different, of course, so not everyone wants to be getting out there playing shows and touring on their material, because we all want different things. But that being said, if you ever intend on performing in front of people with your own music and what you're writing here, you want to make sure that the ideas you're having are able to be replicated. If not exactly the same way, then at least close enough to convey the same sort of idea. Very often we get overexcited in the beginning, and that's not to say that we shouldn't be excited, because first and foremost, you want to make sure you're enjoying what it is you're doing and let yourself do so wholeheartedly. But in the beginning, a lot of times, because we have all of these bits of inspiration and influence, we're just trying to pack as much as we can into those first couple of ideas, and it makes it so we hear them all, we love it, and then we go to do it, and we're like, oh, I don't know if I can pull that off. I don't know if I can do all of that in one setting. Or if you kind of get what you want and you're able to play many shows, that means being able to pull that off and perform that over and over and over again. So that's something you at least want to keep in the back of your head. Not thinking, oh, I need to simplify everything as much as possible, but make sure there's a way to kind of pace it with the ebb and flow of the energy of the song and what you're writing, and then you'll be able to have something that's honest to what you're feeling and able to be performed in the way that you intended for it to be after the fact. Another thing to look out for is stuff with range work, and how very often, and I can say this definitely from personal experience, we tend to write outside of our range in the beginning. And a big reason for that is because we're still learning at this stage. We're still developing our metal vocals and even our singing voices, and most importantly, our musical identity. with the first song you write and the first collection after that, maybe even for a couple of years, we're still trying to figure out who we are in all of this. Because at this stage, what we're carrying the most with us is all of that inspiration and influence that kind of came from outside sources. And we're hearing other people's voices in our head. And like I've talked about here and there before, also on our channel, it's very easy to get overly concerned with other people's sound when we are then going in to do our own thing. And at least in terms of range, this makes it so we tend to start writing for someone else and not really for our own voices. And typically this ends up meaning going too high with things. I'm definitely very guilty of that. In the beginning, writing music that was way too high for me to be able to do. Even though I'm able to sing higher notes, I was singing beyond what I was capable of at the time, or what I was able to do reliably, at least. Because there's always those moments where you can like squeak something out after like the millionth take in the studio, but then if you ever want to try and do that again, you're really struggling because it's only one almost impossible thing that you happen to pull off one time. And that starts to get complicated again in terms of the performance aspect of things. Now, if something feels right for the song, that's one thing, but if you are really pushing yourself beyond your limitations, a lot of that reaching and strain is going to translate into what it is you're doing with your songs. Even if you're not recording them per se, and you're only ever kind of performing them like for yourself or for family and friends or for large audiences, whatever feels right, you're going to create a lot of problems for yourself if you keep your ear really, really much further ahead and above of where you are. So trying to get more comfortable with your own voice is a very important thing when it comes to writing your first handful of songs, to make sure it is something you can actually do without having to muscle your way through every single moment of it. Next on the list has to do with just that same kind of thought of that overwhelming sensation of pushing yourself too hard. That can also be triggered by trying to do too many things at once. Like I said, we're excited in the beginning, and because we have all of this influence and inspiration and we've never written a song before, and we have all of these different life experiences because all of us are different, we try and pile everything we're feeling and everything we are into just one song. And normally, especially I've done this recently where I've revisited some of my older work, you listen back and you're like, oh wow, this just does not settle at all at any point and doesn't rest and jumps all over the place in kind of an incohesive way. At least in the beginning. Trying to more so nail down what it is we're going for is helpful in the beginning. And everyone's songwriting process is a little different. And again, none of these are rules by any means. But having a general idea of where you would like to go is important. And it's really key to understand that you don't have to put every aspect of what your voice can do and therefore who you are into every single song you write and every single song you perform on, and trying to make sure you're more so catering to what's going on around your voice, because it's always not entirely about just the vocal. If you're writing like a vocal a cappella piece, which would be kind of weird in a metal context, but there have been weirder things, that would be a different story. But more often than not, we're talking about more of a band dynamic. Even if you're the one writing everything, you're still writing with other instruments being played around what you're doing that are actually creating the music behind the voice. And you want to make sure that you're flowing with it and not just filling up every single moment of space with another kind of vocal acrobatic flip. Trying to create something more cohesive is very helpful, and kind of thinking about the form and the structure, at least a bit in the beginning, is helpful in terms of getting your feet wet so you know these things exist. And then as you get more comfortable, you can start to spread your wings a little bit. Especially in metal, there are worlds of this music that are a little more complex than others, and you want to make sure you aren't doing the opposite, which also happens a lot, and just sitting in one place, either because of being locked up or being a little insecure about other parts of your voice, and then kind of just only doing one thing the whole time. You want to let yourself be flexible and give yourself some wiggle room without feeling like you have to be doing everything. And with that being said, my second to last point is how, again, like how I mentioned with influence and inspiration, we tend to get caught up in terms of sounding like other people. I know they never got released, but the first couple of things I did definitely just sounded like rip-offs of my favorite bands at the time, and I know there are many other people out there all over the world that have similar experiences, because we don't really know, again, what our own identity is yet. We don't really know what we want yet, and we're kind of parroting everything. We're just repeating what we've heard. That's how we learn everything, and that's totally fine. That's built into us. But it's important to try and figure out the aspects of these things that we really enjoy. Look to your influences and inspirations and figure out not just what it is you enjoy about them, but why it is these things are so important to you. Try and dig a little deeper in terms of these kind of bigger questions about this stuff, and use that to kind of gain those components and use them for yourself. And then you'll be even further along in terms of discovering your own true sound and your voice and what your own musical identity is in all of this. And try and leave that need to hit certain checkpoints in terms of, oh, did this go high enough? Did I get this kind of pacing? Did I nail these kind of parts like someone else has in the past? And more so, let yourself do whatever it is you feel is right. Which is perfect in terms of leading into my last point. The number one thing I will say is the biggest mistake people make, not even in the beginning, but just with songwriting in general, is worrying too much about it. Let's look at the opposite side of the coin now to close things off. It's very easy to get caught up in all of these details. And even at this point, with everything I've mentioned so far, some of these things might sound familiar to you. You may have already done some of these things and noticed that they do cause some problems when you fall into these little vocal traps that we sometimes put ourselves into. But it's equally important to not be overly concerned with feeling like you have to be following a certain template or guidelines, or even trying to follow exactly what I'm saying in this video to a T. First and foremost, like I mentioned, what you're doing should matter to you most and should be what you enjoy above all others. Obviously, when we write music and put it out, we are allowing other people in and inviting them to be a part of what it is we've done and share in that experience and in those sounds that we've made. But first and foremost, let yourself be happy with what it is you're doing, and try to not be overly concerned with, again, the checklist kind of mentality, because you don't want to stifle an idea before you've even had it. And that's something I also fell into pretty early on, maybe not right away, but after a couple of years, especially as what you're doing is starting to work, and you get past that point vocally where you know it's not just a phase, and you start to try and do it a little more seriously and really dig in and try and improve your songwriting, it's very easy to get stressed out and put a lot of these really intense expectations on ourselves in terms of what we should and should not be able to do. And you just want to make sure you don't forget to enjoy the process. I know a lot of people that get stressed out when it comes to writing, and I've worked with many students and seen people all over the place where they enjoy the performing more than the writing just because of that kind of stress level, especially when you get to the point when you're on a schedule and now you throw deadlines into the mix. That can make the act of songwriting a bit stressful when you know you need to have a certain thing done by a certain time. But to that token, that's where even more I stress the point of just allowing yourself to feel open and free with the process and not be overly concerned and stressed out with all of these different components that there are. Try and be aware of them in the moment. Notice them in other people's writing. listen to a lot of music. That's the best thing I can advise in this case. If you want to write a good song, listen to a lot of music, and not just metal. There's so much good music out there, and you can hear so many different examples of what I'm talking about here in terms of both structure and knowing how to write for yourself, and yet simultaneously throwing caution to the wind and allowing yourself to write freely and truly to who it is you are, which is maybe the most important aspect of really finding your own creative, artistic identity as a metal vocalist. Again, these aren't rules, but you can follow as much as you see fit from this video. If this was helpful and you enjoyed it, go ahead and give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel here, because I'll definitely be incorporating more info and kind of helpful tips in terms of songwriting as time goes on. So I'm really excited to see what all of you guys do with this. Thank you all again so much for watching, and as always, scream responsibly.